A shy rancher hired a tall Navajo woman as a cook. 1 week later, she did something to him. Some men wear their loneliness like a second skin, so tight they forget what air feels like without it pressing against their chest. Corwin Gray was one of those men. His ranch sat 15 miles from the nearest town, a wooden structure that seemed to lean away from the world itself. The cattle wandered unfenced. The garden grew wild with weeds. And Corwin moved through it all like a ghost haunting his own life. When he finally wrote the advertisement for a cook, his hands shook so badly the ink smudged. He needed help. But needing and accepting were two different countries, and he had lived in the first one so long he had forgotten the language of the second. The morning Kaya Nightwind arrived, Corwin watched from behind the barn door, his heart hammering against his ribs like something trying to escape. He had expected someone small, someone quiet, someone who would slip into the kitchen and disappear into the work without demanding his attention. What stepped down from that wagon was nothing he had prepared for. She stood nearly 6 feet tall, maybe more, with shoulders that looked like they could carry the weight of the entire ranch without bending. Her hair fell in 2 thick braids past her waist, and she moved with the kind of certainty that made the ground itself seem grateful for her steps. She was Navajo. He knew that from the letter, but knowing and seeing were different things entirely. Corwin pressed himself further into the shadows, his chest constricted. The air in his lungs felt suddenly insufficient. This was a mistake. This was all a terrible mistake. He should never have posted that advertisement, should never have imagined he could share this space with another human being, let alone someone who seemed to take up more room than the barn itself. Kaya set her bag on the porch and looked directly at the barn, not toward it, at it, as if she could see through the weathered wood and into the cramped space where he held his breath. "You the one who needs a cook?" Her voice carried across the yard without effort. Low and steady. Corwin said nothing, could say nothing. His throat had closed around the words. She waited. 15 seconds. 20. Then she picked up her bag and walked toward the house. "I'll be in the kitchen. You come in when you're ready." But he knew he would never be ready. That was the whole problem. 3 years he had managed this ranch alone, barely eating, barely sleeping, barely existing in any way that resembled living. The cattle survived because habit ran deeper than grief. The land persisted because it had no other choice. And Corwin endured because stopping would require a decision, and decisions required a presence of mind he no longer possessed. He waited an hour before approaching the house, crept up to the kitchen window and peered inside. She had already found everything. The pots he never used, the plates gathering dust, the pantry that held more cobwebs than food. She stood at the stove, her back to him, and even from this distance he could see the controlled efficiency of her movements. No wasted motion, no uncertainty. She knew exactly what she was doing. He left an envelope on the porch rail. Payment for the first week. Instructions written in careful script. Meals to be left on the table. No need for conversation. No need for presence. Just food and distance, and the understanding that some arrangements worked best when both parties pretended the other barely existed. When he checked back an hour later, the envelope was gone. In its place sat a plate covered with cloth. Beneath it, bread still warm from the oven and meat that smelled like something he had forgotten food could be. Next to the plate, a note in handwriting that looked like it had never questioned itself. "Eat all of it." Corwin picked up the plate with trembling hands, carried it to the barn where he took his meals now, sat in the hay and unwrapped the cloth. The bread was perfect, the meat seasoned in ways he did not recognize. His stomach cramped with hunger he had been ignoring for so long it had become part of his baseline existence. He ate 3 bites and stopped, set the plate aside, pressed his palms against his eyes until colors burst behind the lids. He did not deserve this, did not deserve warm bread or seasoned meat or the kindness of someone taking the time to cook for a man who could not even look her in the face. Sarah had done that, had filled this kitchen with smells that made the house feel like something other than shelter. And when she died, he had let that die with her, let everything die with her except the breathing, which continued against his wishes. The sun dropped toward the horizon. Shadows stretched long across the yard, and somewhere in that house, a woman he had never truly met cleaned up after making food for a man she had never truly seen. Tomorrow would be worse. Tomorrow he would have to maintain this impossible distance while she moved through spaces that used to be his alone. Tomorrow he would have to pretend that having another person within 100 yards did not make his skin feel like it was trying to crawl off his bones. He did not know how he would survive a week of this. did not know how he would survive a single day. But the alternative was starving to death in a barn surrounded by land he could no longer work and animals he could no longer feed. So he would try, would maintain the distance, would leave notes and take plates and never ever let her see the man behind the carefully constructed walls. What he did not know, could not know, was that in 6 days, everything would change. That distance would become impossible, that walls crumble fastest when the foundation gives out, and that sometimes the thing you fear most is the only thing that can save you. Inside the house, Kaya washed the dishes and looked out toward the barn. She had seen men like this before, men who carried weight that had nothing to do with muscle and everything to do with memory. Her grandmother had taught her to recognize the signs, the way they moved like they were always apologizing for taking up space, the way they avoided eyes like eye contact could burn, the way they breathed shallow, as if deep breaths might crack something open they had spent years sealing shut. She dried the last plate and set it in the cupboard. Tomorrow she would cook breakfast, leave it on the table as instructed, pretend she did not notice the plate from tonight sitting on the porch rail with 3/4 of the food uneaten, pretend she did not see him watching from the shadows, pretend that the man who hired her was anything other than someone drowning on dry land. But Kaya did not pretend for long. It was not in her nature, and something in her gut told her this arrangement would not last in its current form. Something would break. Something always did when people tried to maintain walls that were never meant to stand. She just did not know how soon that breaking would come, or how high the cost would be when it did. The second morning, Corwin woke before dawn and immediately felt the wrongness of another presence in his space. Someone was moving in his kitchen. Someone was breathing his air. Someone existed in the same 100 yards of earth he occupied, and his body responded like she carried a disease he could catch through proximity alone. He dressed in the dark and slipped out through the barn's back entrance, took his tools, and headed toward the farthest fence line. If he timed it right, he could work until noon, return when she would be resting, grab whatever food she left and disappear again before their paths crossed. It was a coward's plan. He knew that. But cowardice had kept him alive this long, and he saw no reason to abandon a strategy that worked. What Corwin wanted was simple: food without conversation, help without obligation, a body moving through his space that somehow remained invisible. He wanted her to cook and clean and exist in a way that did not require him to acknowledge that she was real, that she had thoughts, that she might form opinions about the pathetic man who paid her to pretend he did not exist. But Kaya wanted something different. Not conversation exactly. Not friendship. She had not come here seeking connection. She had come because the pay was fair, and the isolation suited her own purposes. What she wanted was to do her job without the absurd dance of avoidance. She wanted him to eat the food she prepared, to stop leaving plates 3/4 full like some kind of silent protest against nourishment itself. She wanted basic human efficiency in an arrangement that should have been straightforward. By the third day, patterns had emerged. Corwin left before sunrise, returned after dark, communicated exclusively through notes written in cramped handwriting that looked like it was trying to disappear off the page. Thank you. Excellent meal. Please reduce portions. Each word carefully chosen to convey gratitude while maintaining maximum distance. Kaya responded in kind, left notes of her own. Eat more. You're too thin. Working on empty stomach dangerous. Her handwriting took up more space than his entire notes combined. Each letter formed with the same confidence she carried in her body. She cleaned the house because the dust offended her, not for him. She organized the pantry because chaos made cooking inefficient, not for him. She repaired the sagging porch step because it was dangerous and she refused to break her ankle for someone else's negligence, not for him. But she also watched, could not help watching, because something about Corwin Gray pulled at a thread in her chest that she thought she had cut years ago when she left her grandmother's house. He reminded her of her cousin after the incident no one spoke about. The way he moved through space like he was constantly apologizing, the way his hands shook when he thought no one could see, the way he existed at half volume as if turning himself down might make him disappear entirely. On the fourth morning, Kaya rose early and positioned herself on the porch, waited. When Corwin tried to slip past in the pre-dawn darkness, she spoke. "You're going to collapse out there." He froze. Actually froze mid-step like her voice had turned him to stone. Did not turn around. Did not acknowledge her beyond the sudden rigidity of his spine. "I've been watching the plates. You eat maybe a quarter of what I cook. A man can't work land on that little fuel. Nothing. Not even breathing that she could hear. I'm not trying to talk to you, she continued, her voice level. I'm trying to keep you from dying on my watch. Because if you pass out in some field and the coyotes get to you before someone finds you, that becomes my problem. His shoulders lifted. A breath finally. Then movement. He walked away without responding. Disappeared into the darkness like she had never spoken at all. Kaya sat back in her chair. This was worse than she thought. Whatever lived inside Corwin Gray had teeth, had dug in deep, and she recognized that particular brand of pain because she had seen it before. In her uncle after the long winter. In her brother after the accident that took his best friend. In herself, once, when she was younger, and thought grief could be outrun. She went inside and made breakfast. Eggs, bacon, bread. More than one person could reasonably eat. Left it on the table with a note that said only, all of it. When she checked later, the plate was gone. When she checked the porch, she found it there. Empty except for a folded piece of paper. She unfolded it. 3 words in that cramped handwriting. I'm trying. Kaya stared at those words for a long moment. They were the first honest thing he had said since she arrived. The first acknowledgement that this arrangement was not working. That he was not working. That something fundamental was broken, and had been broken for so long that working felt like a foreign language. She folded the note and put it in her pocket. Tomorrow she would push harder. Would find a way to make him see that whatever he was doing to himself in the name of penance or grief, or whatever story he told himself at night, it was not sustainable. The body did not run on guilt. The land did not care about emotional pain. And if he kept starving himself while working from dawn to dusk, he would not make it through the week. What Kaya did not know was that she was wrong about the timeline. He would not even make it through tomorrow. Because tomorrow he would go to the farthest fence line. And tomorrow, a snake would be sunning itself on a rock he needed to move. And tomorrow everything would change in ways neither of them could anticipate. But tonight, she simply sat on the porch and watched the stars emerge. Somewhere out in those fields, a broken man was trying to work himself to death. And she had 6 days left to figure out how to stop him before her contract ended. And she moved on to the next job that required her particular set of skills. 6 days. She had no idea how little time that actually was. On the 5th day, Kaya stopped playing by Corwin's rules. She had tried patience, had tried notes, had tried the careful dance of giving him space while also trying to keep him alive. None of it was working. The man was withering before her eyes, and she had spent too many years learning how to read the signs of a body giving up to ignore what she saw now. So when she heard him in the barn that morning, she walked straight to the door and opened it. Corwin was saddling his horse. His hands fumbled with the straps, twice, 3 times. The leather kept slipping through his fingers like his grip had forgotten how to hold. We need to talk, Kaya said. He did not look up. Kept working on the saddle with trembling hands that betrayed just how far past exhaustion he had pushed himself. I don't require conversation as part of our arrangement. His voice came out thin, stretched tight. No, but you do require staying alive, and right now you're failing at that. He stopped moving. The barn filled with the kind of silence that pressed against eardrums. When he finally spoke, his words came out barely above a whisper. I'm managing. You're not. She took 2 steps into the barn. He took 2 steps back. The horse shifted between them, uneasy with the tension. You're working 12-hour days on food that wouldn't sustain a child. Your hands shake. Your breathing is shallow. You move like every step costs you something you can barely afford to spend. That's not your concern. He grabbed the horse's reins, prepared to lead it past her. To escape again. Kaya did not move from the doorway. She was taller than him by 3 inches, broader through the shoulders, and she used every bit of that presence now, not as a threat, but as an immovable fact. Make it make sense, she said. Help me understand why a man would hire someone to cook for him and then refuse to eat. Why he would pay money to starve himself with company instead of starving alone. Something in Corwin's face cracked. Just a hairline fracture. But she saw it. Saw the moment her words found the thing he had been protecting. You don't understand. His voice broke on the last word. Actually broke. Like something inside him was shattering in real time. Then explain it to me. I can't. He pulled at the reins. The horse resisted, sensed his instability. Please move. No. Please. The word came out desperate now, ragged. I need to work. I need to, need to what? Punish yourself? She kept her voice level, not cruel, just factual. Because that's what this is. You're not managing a ranch. You're torturing yourself with it. I deserve... He stopped, bit down on whatever was coming next. Tried to push past her. She caught his arm, gentle but firm. He yanked away like her touch burned. His back hit the barn wall. His breathing came in sharp gasps. His eyes finally met hers for a split second before darting away. And what she saw there made her release him immediately. Terror, pure and animal. Not of her specifically, but of everything. Of contact, of conversation, of being seen by another human being in a way that required him to exist as something other than a ghost. I don't deserve the food. The words tumbled out before he could stop them. I don't deserve anything. I should have. She needed. I failed. He stopped, pressed both hands against his face. His whole body shook. Kaya took 3 steps back, gave him the space he desperately needed. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her head. Some wounds you cannot touch directly. They must heal from the inside first. Push too hard, and you drive the infection deeper. Okay, she said quietly. I'll step back, but I need you to promise me something. He did not respond. Could not respond. Was barely holding himself together against the wall. Promise me you'll eat half of what I make. Not all of it. Not even most of it. Just half. Can you do that? Silence. Then a barely perceptible nod. And promise me you'll come back before dark. Not after. Before. While there's still light to see by. Another nod. Smaller this time. She turned and left the barn. Walked back to the house with her jaw tight and her hands curled into fists. Not at him. At whatever had broken him so thoroughly that basic human kindness felt like an attack. At whatever had happened to make him believe he deserved to waste away in a barn surrounded by land he could barely maintain. That afternoon she prepared food and left it on the table as always. But she also did something else. Walked the property. Noted which fence lines he favored, which fields he disappeared into, the routes he took to avoid the house. She was not tracking him to violate his space. She was learning the territory. Because her gut told her something was coming. Told her that whatever balance he had been maintaining was too fragile to last. When he returned that evening, before dark as promised, she stayed in her room. Listened to him move through the house like a shadow. Heard the scrape of plate on table, the sound of him eating. Not half like she asked, but more than yesterday. Small progress in a war he was waging against himself. Later, she found a note on the porch. I'm sorry. She folded it and added it to the first one in her pocket. 2 honest things now. 2 cracks in the armor he wore like skin. Not enough to save him, but enough to know that somewhere under all that pain, a part of him still wanted to be saved. Tomorrow would be day 6. 1 day, left in the week. 1 day before everything changed. And she had no idea that tomorrow he would ride out to the farthest fence line where the terrain turned rocky and the snakes came out to sun themselves on warm stones. Had no idea that all her careful observation of his patterns would be the only thing that let her find him in time. Tonight she simply sat in the dark and wondered what could break a person so completely, and whether anything she did in the next 24 hours would matter at all. Day 6 began like all the others. Corwin woke before dawn, avoided the house, and headed toward the farthest fence line where the land turned rocky and uneven. He told himself he was checking the posts, that the cattle needed better boundaries, that this had nothing to do with putting maximum distance between himself and the woman whose presence made his chest feel too small for his lungs. The work was familiar, physical. It required no thought beyond the immediate task. Move the stone, check the post, tighten the wire, repeat. His hands had stopped shaking as badly. Yesterday he had eaten half the breakfast she made. This morning he had eaten a bit more. Small victories in a war he was losing, but victories nonetheless. He bent to lift a large flat stone that had rolled against a post, grabbed it with both hands, lifted, and that was when he saw the snake. It was coiled in the shadow beneath the stone, a rattlesnake, thick-bodied and furious at being disturbed from its sun-warmed resting spot. It struck before Corwin could drop the stone, before he could move, before his brain could process the danger. Fangs sank into his left calf just above his boot. The pain was immediate and electric. He stumbled backward, dropping the stone. The snake retreated into the rocks, its rattling warning far too late to matter. Corwin looked down at his leg, 2 puncture marks, blood already welling up around them. His heart rate spiked immediately, pumping the venom through his system faster. He knew the statistics. Out here, alone, at least an hour ride from the house, the venom would spread. His leg would swell. The pain would intensify. He needed to slow his heart rate, needed to stay calm, needed to get back before the symptoms became debilitating. Corwin grabbed the fence post and pulled himself upright. His leg already felt wrong, heavy, hot. He untied his horse with fumbling fingers and somehow managed to pull himself into the saddle. Every movement sent fresh agony through his calf. The horse sensed his distress and shifted nervously. "Easy," he whispered. His own voice sounded distant. "Easy. Just get me home." He turned the horse toward the ranch and urged it forward. The ride back became a blur of pain and failing consciousness. His vision narrowed. The world tilted. He gripped the saddle horn with both hands and focused entirely on staying upright. If he fell out here, that would be the end. The coyotes would find him before anyone else did. Halfway back, he started to lose time. The sun jumped positions in the sky. The landscape repeated itself. Or maybe he was going in circles. His leg had swollen so tight against his boot that the leather cut into flesh. Nausea rolled through him in waves. Cold sweat soaked through his shirt despite the heat. The horse stopped. Corwin blinked, tried to understand why they were not moving. Then his body made the decision his mind could no longer make. He slid sideways out of the saddle and hit the ground hard. The impact drove what little air remained from his lungs. He lay there in the dirt, staring up at the sky. His legs screamed, his heart hammered erratically, his breathing came in shallow gasps. This was it. This was how it ended. Alone in a field, poisoned by a snake, too stubborn to accept help when it was offered. Sarah would have laughed at the irony, would have told him he was an idiot, would have held his hand while he died, and forgiven him for being exactly the kind of fool who would get himself killed trying to run from human connection. His vision grayed at the edges. The sky above him pulsed with his heartbeat. He thought about closing his eyes, thought about just letting go. It would be easier, quieter. He was so tired of fighting, so tired of existing in this half-life where every breath felt like an apology for still being alive. Then he heard it. Hoofbeats. Fast. Getting closer. A voice calling his name. "Corwin!" Kaya. She had come looking for him. She had noticed he had not returned, had followed the route she had mapped yesterday, had tracked him like he was prey, and she was something that did not give up easily. He tried to call out, could not. His throat had closed. His tongue felt thick. The world spun and darkened. The last thing he saw before consciousness left him completely was her face above his, her eyes scanning his body with the kind of focus that saw everything. The swollen leg, the puncture marks, the way his breathing had turned shallow and rapid. Snakebite. Her voice was calm, controlled. No panic. Stay with me. But he could not stay. The darkness pulled him down like water closing over his head. And for the first time in 3 years, Corwin Gray surrendered completely to something outside his control. Let go, fell, and trusted that someone would catch him. Kaya assessed the situation in seconds. Snakebite, left calf, severe swelling, patient unconscious, breathing shallow but steady, pulse rapid. Time was the enemy now. Every minute that passed let the venom spread further through his system. She had seen snakebites before, had treated 2 in her grandmother's care, had learned which plants helped and which ones were useless folklore. This was survivable, but only if she moved fast and kept her head. First priority, get him back to the house. She was strong, had carried injured sheep across rough terrain, had helped move a fallen horse once, but Corwin was dead weight and much heavier than he looked. She gripped him under the arms and dragged him to his horse. The animal stood steady, well-trained despite the chaos. She used a nearby rock as a step and somehow managed to lift Corwin's limp body across the saddle, tied him in place with her belt and a length of rope from her bag. Then she mounted behind him, one arm wrapped tight around his chest to keep him from sliding off, grabbed the reins, and rode harder than she had ever ridden in her life. The house appeared after what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes. She did not bother with gentle dismounting, simply slid off and pulled Corwin down after her, catching him before he hit the ground. Dragged him inside, got him onto his bed, cut away his pant leg with a knife from the kitchen. The bite was bad. The leg had swollen to nearly twice its normal size. The tissue around the puncture marks had turned dark purple. She pressed gently, hot to the touch. The venom was doing its work, breaking down tissue, spreading through his blood. His body would fight it, but she needed to help. Kaya ran to her bag and pulled out the leather pouch she always carried. Inside were dried plants she had gathered over months. Yarrow for bleeding and inflammation, echinacea root to support the body's defenses, plantain leaves for drawing out infection. Not magic, not mysticism, just plants that had properties her grandmother had taught her to recognize and use. She crushed the plantain leaves with water to make a thick paste, applied it directly to the bite. The plant would not neutralize the venom, but it would help reduce swelling and draw out some of the damaged tissue. Then she made a tea from the echinacea root and yarrow. Strong, bitter. She would need to get it into him somehow when he woke. If he woke, she pushed that thought away. He would wake. His breathing was steady. His heart rate, while elevated, was not dangerously so. The human body was resilient when given the chance to fight. Kaya pulled a chair next to the bed and settled in to wait. She soaked cloth in cool water and placed it on his forehead. His skin was already heating up. Fever was coming. That was normal. The body raising its temperature to fight the venom. She would manage it. Keep him cool. Keep him hydrated. Keep him alive. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. She changed the poultice twice. Wiped his face and chest with cool water. Checked his pulse. Monitored his breathing. Talked to him even though he could not hear her. It helped to talk. Helped her stay focused on the task instead of the reality that if she had arrived 10 minutes later, she would be digging a grave instead of keeping vigil. As evening approached, Corwin stirred. His eyelids fluttered. A moan escaped his throat. Kaya leaned forward. "Corwin, can you hear me?" His eyes opened, unfocused, glassy with fever that was building now. He looked at her without recognition, without fear, just looked, like a child waking from a nightmare and seeing someone familiar. "Water," he whispered. She lifted his head and held a cup to his lips. He drank, choked, drank more. She eased him back down and he closed his eyes again, but not unconscious this time, just exhausted, just surrendering to what his body needed. "The snake," he murmured. "I was so stupid. You couldn't have known it was there. Should have been more careful. Should have." His words trailed off. The fever was rising. She could see it in the flush spreading across his face, in the way his breathing quickened. "Don't talk. Just rest. The next few days are going to be hard." She placed her hand on his. He did not pull away. Could not pull away. Was too weak to maintain the walls he had spent 3 years building. "I'm going to stay right here. I'm not leaving." He looked at her then. Really looked. And something in his eyes cracked open. Not breaking. Just opening. Like a door that had been locked for so long it had forgotten it had hinges. "Why?" The question came out broken. "Why would you help me?" "Because that's what people do," Kaya said simply. "They help each other survive." Corwin's eyes closed. His breathing evened out, and Kaya settled back in her chair for what she knew would be a long night. The fever was just beginning. The worst was still ahead, but she had been here before, had sat vigil over sick relatives and injured friends, had learned patience from her grandmother, who said healing was 90% presence and 10% skill. So she would be present, would sit here in this room with a man she barely knew and keep him alive through sheer stubborn refusal to let death win. Not on her watch. Not when she had the knowledge to fight it. 3 days. Kaya counted them by the light that came through the window and the number of times she changed the poultice on his leg. 3 days of fever that climbed and fell in waves. 3 days of cooling his skin with damp cloth and forcing water between his lips when he surfaced long enough to swallow. 3 days of watching a man fight poison while his body decided whether to surrender or survive. On the morning of the 4th day, the fever broke. Kaya woke in her chair to find Corwin staring at the ceiling, his eyes clear for the first time since the snake had bitten him. She leaned forward, her back protesting after another night spent upright. "You're awake." She kept her voice low. "Calm. How do you feel?" He turned his head slowly, like the movement required more energy than he possessed. When his eyes met hers, he did not look away. For the first time since she had arrived at this ranch, Corwin Gray looked directly at another human being and held the gaze. "Like I died and came back wrong." His voice was rough from disuse. "How long?" 3 days. The fever was stubborn. He processed this information slowly, looked down at his leg, which was still swollen but no longer the angry purple it had been. Then back to her face, Something shifted in his expression, a realization settling into place. You stayed. Not a question. A statement of fact that seemed to confound him. Of course I stayed. You were dying. But you could have left. Could have taken the horse and ridden to town for help. Left me here and what? Let you die alone because you're too stubborn to accept help? She stood and moved to the window, needing to look at something other than the confusion in his eyes. That's not who I am. Silence filled the room. When she turned back, Corwin had closed his eyes, but she could see he was not sleeping, just processing, working through something internal that had no easy resolution. I don't understand you, he said finally. I've done nothing but avoid you. I've been rude. I've made this arrangement as difficult as possible, and you stayed anyway. You want me to explain basic human decency to you? I want to understand why you would waste 3 days keeping alive a man who clearly doesn't want to be kept alive. There it was. The truth he had been carrying since she arrived. Maybe longer. The weight that made him move like he was apologizing for taking up space. Kaya sat back down in the chair, her body aching from exhaustion, but her mind sharp with recognition. Is that what you think this has been about? Punishment? Penance? She leaned forward, making him look at her. You're not avoiding me because you're shy, Corwin. You're avoiding everyone because you think you deserve to disappear. His jaw tightened. His hands gripped the blanket, but he did not deny it. My wife died 3 years ago. The words came out flat, emotionless, like he had practiced saying them without feeling them. She got sick. Fever, like what I just had, but worse. Lasted 2 weeks. I did everything I could. Rode to town for medicine, made her comfortable, sat with her, and she died anyway. In this bed, in this room. Kaya's chest tightened. The pieces were falling into place now. The empty house. The refusal to eat. The way he had looked at her when she said she would stay with him through the fever. You think you failed her, she said quietly. I know I did. The doctor said if I had brought her to town sooner, they might have saved her. But I waited. Thought I could handle it myself. Thought it would pass. And by the time I realized how bad it was too late. He looked at her with eyes that carried 3 years of guilt. So yes, I think I deserve to disappear. I think I deserve every moment of suffering. Because she suffered, and I couldn't stop it. That's not how illness works. You know that. Knowing and feeling are different things. Kaya sat back. She understood now. Understood why her presence had terrified him. Why being cared for felt like a betrayal. He had built his entire existence around the belief that he deserved nothing. That accepting comfort was an insult to the woman who had died without it. She wouldn't want this for you, Kaya said. Whatever else I know about loss, I know that. The people we lose don't want us to die with them. You didn't know her. No. But I know grief. I know what it looks like when someone turns pain into identity. When someone decides that suffering is the only way to honor the dead. She stood and moved to the door. Your leg needs another poultice. I'll make food. You'll eat it. And then you'll rest. Because you're not done healing. Not by a long way. She left before he could respond. Left him alone with the truth that had been spoken aloud for the first time in 3 years. Left him to decide whether he would keep carrying guilt like armor, or whether he would finally let someone help him set it down. Recovery was not dramatic. There were no sudden revelations or miraculous transformations. Just small changes that accumulated like snow on a roof until the weight of them became undeniable. On the 5th day after the bite, Corwin sat up in bed without help. On the 6th, he walked to the chair by the window, his legs still weak but bearing his weight. On the 7th, he made it to the kitchen table and sat there while Kaya prepared breakfast. Did not flee, did not make excuses, just sat. You don't have to watch me cook, she said, not looking up from the pan. I know. He shifted in the chair. But I'm trying to do what you said. To stop running. She glanced at him. His hands rested on the table, not clenched into fists or hidden in his lap. His shoulders were still tense, but no longer drawn up to his ears like he was expecting a blow. Progress measured in inches, but progress nonetheless. It's harder than I thought it would be, he admitted. Just sitting here, being seen. Most difficult things are. They ate in silence. Not the uncomfortable silence of 2 strangers forced into proximity, but something quieter, more settled. When Corwin finished his plate, actually finished it, he looked at her with something that might have been the beginning of a smile, That's the first full meal I've eaten in 3 years. I noticed. You don't miss much, do you? My grandmother taught me to watch, to pay attention. She said most people tell you everything you need to know if you just observe. Kaya stood and cleared the plates. She was a healer. Taught me everything I know about plants and medicine. Is she why you know how to treat snake bites? She's why I know how to treat most things. She believed the land provides what we need if we learn to recognize it. Kaya returned to the table with tea, set a cup in front of him. She died 2 years ago. I left the community shortly after. Corwin wrapped his hands around the cup. Why did you leave? Because I couldn't stay without her. Everything there reminded me of her. Every plant I harvested, every person I treated. She was woven into all of it. Kaya stared into her own cup. I thought distance would make the grief smaller, make it manageable. Did it? No, grief doesn't shrink with distance. It just becomes a thing you carry everywhere instead of a thing tied to one place. She looked up at him. But I learned something useful. I learned that running from pain doesn't work. You take it with you wherever you go. Corwin absorbed this, saw himself reflected in her words, saw the uselessness of his isolation laid bare in someone else's experience. I've been running for 3 years, he said quietly. Thought if I stayed here, stayed where she died, I could somehow make it mean something. Thought suffering in the same place she suffered was a form of loyalty. It's not loyalty. It's just suffering. I'm starting to see that. He met her eyes, held the gaze longer than he had managed before. You saved my life. Not just from the snake, from everything else too. I kept you alive. You have to decide what to do with that life. The next days followed a pattern. Corwin grew stronger. His leg healed, the swelling reduced. The purple faded to yellow and green as his body absorbed the damaged tissue. He started moving around the property, not working yet, but walking, reacquainting himself with land he had been avoiding through constant motion. Kaya watched him change, saw him start to occupy space instead of apologizing for it, saw him look up when she entered a room instead of finding excuses to leave, saw him ask questions about her work, her travels, her plans, small conversations that built into something larger. On the 10th day, they sat on the porch together as the sun set, not touching, not speaking, just existing in the same space without tension. Corwin broke the silence first. Your contract was for 1 week. That ended 3 days ago. I know. Why are you still here? Kaya considered the question, considered the true answer and whether she was ready to speak it aloud, decided that honesty had served them better than avoidance. Because I recognize what I see in you. Because I know what it's like to carry weight you think you deserve. Because watching you start to heal feels like watching proof that healing is possible. She turned to look at him. And because somewhere in the last 10 days, I stopped thinking about the next job. Stopped planning where to go when this ended. Corwin held her gaze. Something passed between them. Not romance exactly. Not yet. But recognition. Connection. The understanding that two people who had been running from different griefs had somehow ended up in the same place, at the same time, and that maybe that meant something. Stay, he said, not as hired help, as someone who belongs here, if you want to. Kaya did not answer immediately, but she did not leave the porch either. The morning after Corwin asked her to stay, Kaya woke to find him already in the kitchen, not hiding, not avoiding, just there, attempting to make coffee with the careful movements of someone still learning to trust his own body again. He turned when she entered, made eye contact, held it. I wasn't sure you'd still be here, he said quietly. I'm still deciding. She moved to the stove and took over the coffee, not because he was doing it wrong, but because it gave her hands something to do. Staying means more than just living here. It means committing to something, to this place, she paused, to watching you continue the work of healing, to being part of that. I know. He sat at the table, the same table where 10 days ago he could barely stand to be in the same room as another person. I'm not healed. I don't know if I ever will be completely, but I'm trying. For the first time in 3 years, I'm actually trying. Kaya poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of him, sat down across from him instead of maintaining distance. This small act felt enormous. 2 people sharing morning coffee like it was the most natural thing in the world. I left my community because I thought I needed to keep moving, she said. Thought staying still meant drowning in memories. But I've been moving for 2 years, and the grief followed me everywhere. Maybe staying still is what teaches you how to live with it. Is that a yes? She looked at him. Really looked. Saw the man who had been broken and was learning how to be whole again. Saw someone who had spent 3 years punishing himself and was finally, considering the possibility that he deserved to live. Saw someone who had looked at her with terror in his eyes and now looked at her with something that might grow into trust. Maybe more than trust, given time. Yes, she said. I'll stay. The relief that crossed Corwin's face was immediate and unguarded. He did not try to hide it, did not apologize for feeling it, just let it show. Another small victory in the war against his own instinct to disappear. They finished their coffee in comfortable silence. Then Corwin stood, testing his leg, and moved to the window, looked out at the ranch that had been his prison and his punishment for 3 years. I need to check the fence line. The one where the snake bit me. Need to finish the repair. He glanced back at her. Would you come with me? I don't want to go alone. Not yet. Of course. They walked together across the land, Corwin moving slower than he once had, but moving nonetheless. When they reached the spot where he had fallen, where his blood had stained the dirt and his horse had stood vigil, he stopped, stood there for a long moment looking at the evidence of how close he had come to dying. I would have died here, he said, if you hadn't come looking for me, if you hadn't cared enough to track me down. But you didn't die. You're here. We're both here. He turned to her. For the first time since she had arrived, Corwin Gray smiled. Not a big smile, not the kind that erased 3 years of pain in an instant, but a real smile, one that reached his eyes and suggested that somewhere inside, he remembered what it felt like to be alive instead of just existing. Thank you, he said, for everything, for staying through the fever, for not giving up on someone who had given up on himself, for being exactly what I needed even when I didn't know I needed it. Kaya reached out and took his hand. He did not pull away, just held on. 2 people who had been running from grief in different directions, standing together in the place where one of them had almost died, choosing instead to live. They had a long way to go. Healing was not linear. There would be hard days ahead, days when the old patterns tried to reassert themselves, days when grief felt too heavy to carry, but they would face those days together, would build something new in the space where pain had lived for too long. The sun climbed higher, the land stretched out around them, and 2 people who had been lost found themselves standing on solid ground, ready to take the next step forward. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the Old West, where courage and redemption collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.